Hello all you lovely cosmonauts, it is finally time to sit down and review one of the biggest games of the year, biggest successes of the year, which is of course PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, also more popularly known as PUBG. I reviewed the beta early access version of the product and now 1.0 is finally here, and I'm looking forward to getting into the nitty and gritty of the final version of PUBG. Now of course I have put more hours than I would care to admit into PUBG. I'm looking to around plus 90 hours, let's say, since its conception in early access. A lot of people don't know much about the developers. The developers are Blue Hole Interactive, who are actually a South Korean developer, and it's often people don't really know that they're actually an Asian developer. Many people are kind of biased, or there's at least somewhat of a stigma in the industry, especially in the West, of Asian developers, because it's for some reason Western people a lot of the time seem to think that Asian developers, particularly around China, Korea, that kind of area, means that the quality of their games is lesser. That is definitely not the case, and in a lot of cases people will play a lot of Chinese, Korean, just general Asian developed games, and without even realizing it. Even AAA titles a lot of the time are actually in part created and developed by a lot of contracted studios out of Asia, and you just don't know it because they're not on the credits a lot of the time. So it is something to bear in mind when you have a perspective on the industry. But enough about that, let's get on to PUBG. Now, it's something that we've all waited for since its early access launch. There has been multiple controversies surrounding PUBG and surrounding Brendan Green. I'm going to avoid those mostly for the review because they have nothing to do with the core gameplay. I am actually producing a video talking about a couple of things Brendan Green's recently said, so make sure to keep an eye out for that when that releases. But let's get right down to the nitty-gritty of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. It is essentially a battle royale game, which by means that you or a group of players, you and your friends, will enter into an arena shooter whereby the map is ever increasingly smaller as time goes by, and it's your sole job to kill, hide and camp your way to basically winning the match. And that's basically that. There's nothing more to it than that. You start each match with absolutely nothing, and then you have to run around, scavenge for weapons and armor and various items, and try and survive the entirety of the match without getting absolutely destroyed like I do most of the time. Now, when I looked at the game back in its early access time, I did criticize the game for several things, mostly due to its technical performance, because it was technically a mess. It was unoptimized, it ran poorly, the frame rate drops were significant, it was generally ugly for the most part, and I wanted to see really how much they had shored this up since I'd played since early access. And so we start with my biggest issue and biggest disappointment of the game. It still remains a buggy, unoptimized, poor performance piece of a game. Because ultimately, what I want from, especially from a multiplayer game, is I want smoothness, right? I want the game to feel smooth, I want it to react fast, and I don't want it to drop frames every 20 seconds, I don't want things to look ugly, I want it to be an unpleasant viewing experience from both a aesthetic and a gameplay perspective, because ultimately I have to sit there and potentially play for 30 minutes a game, and I want it to be an enjoyable 30 minutes. PUBG is not an enjoyable 30 minutes for me in that aspect. It still remains as buggy, as unoptimized, as, you know, laggy, and it chugs along, the frame rates drop, there's clipping, there's asset problems, and it just is overall ugly to look at and to play for the entirety of your time with it. A lot of the issues that were in early access remain in the full version, and frankly I don't see them patching them out anytime soon, because if you were going to patch something like that out, if you were going to really optimize it for, you know, that smooth gameplay experience, you would have done that for full launch, and it hasn't been done. It is better than it was, it is not as good as it should be by far, especially when you compare it to something like Fortnite Battle Royale, where they have, ultimately created something that isn't finished, but it runs 10 times better in nearly every aspect than PUBG does right now. So from a performance perspective, it is dismal, and I'm very disappointed that a lot of that was not fixed. However, that being said, the core of the gameplay in what PUBG has always been, in terms of the shooting, in terms of the overall Battle Royale survival experience, remains top notch. It remains as fun as it was day one in early access. There are, of course, issues to contend with. There are, of course, I feel that sometimes the controls can be a bit sluggish, and I feel like they've toned the pace of a lot of the movement down since early access, especially since the implementation of the vaulting over fences and the ability to climb things in a much more, let's say, authentic way. They've really slowed the pace of that movement down, and that has resulted in the controls feeling a little bit more sluggish. But the core gameplay in terms of the running, gunning, hiding, killing, looting still remains as fun as it ever was. There are still problems with the server side of things. It was absolutely bombed day one, and ultimately that is going to occur every now and again. You are going to get maintenance, you are going to get a little bit of lag, when the servers start to struggle under the pressure, but overall it's fairly stable and it's a fairly enjoyable experience from a multiplayer aspect. And that's really where the fun of PUBG comes in, right? I mean, ultimately it is the wacky, crazy things and the unpredictability of playing with other people, even more so when you're playing duo or squad with both friends or strangers. You can have a really fun, spontaneous time, and I think that's where the real big pull is. I mean, sure, it is definitely fun playing solo, you against the world, and coming out on top, and that is certainly a fun experience. But for me, the longevity of PUBG came from moving from solo to duo to squad and having a really good time with a group of players where we could chat on voice chat and have a really interesting, fun experience as a group against other players. And I think that's where the fun factor comes in for the game. If you took that away and you just limited it to solo, then you're going to really have a hard time over an extended period of time to really put that fun factor and inject that engagement into the game. I also think that it really did help that they added the first-person perspective option and having two separate modes, third-person mode and first-person mode. Third-person mode is certainly fun. I really enjoy playing it. In fact, I actually prefer it because of a lot of the viewing angles that you can get in third-person. But it does make it a lot more frustrating if you want a straight-up equality match, because ultimately people can see round corners without actually seeing round corners in third person. Whereas if you play in first-person mode, you're guaranteed that ultimately people can't, move their camera to a place where they know you're hiding around that corner, right? So ultimately that is there for those people, and it does make it a much more equal and fair experience. It does suffer, however, from hackers, and I have to say that it's not as common as it was, but there are a few times still, even now, playing the game where I think there is no way in hell that you made that shot from that distance and knew that I was there. There's no way you knew I was behind that wall from that distance. And especially with the introduction of the kill cam, whereby you can replay what the other person was doing and where the other person was, there's a couple of times where I have been especially suspicious of certain shots coming from certain directions over a certain distance for sure. But overall, I have to say that it remains a very fun experience. It remains a very fun Battle Royale experience. I don't think it particularly looks good. I really hate the aesthetic, especially because a lot of the assets are actually just Unreal Engine store-bought assets for the most part. I think it's really poorly optimized. I don't enjoy the sluggish nature of the controls at times. Ultimately, it's a very imperfect game. It's got flaws across the board in nearly every department, but still manages to retain what ultimately people look for in a multiplayer battle royale game, which is the fun factor. It is fun to play. It is engaging to play. It is tense. It can be hilarious at times. Random things happen. Some of the glitches and bugs that happen can be hilarious, but ultimately it is still bug-ridden. It is still poorly optimized, and it still can be a chore to play at times. I think, in terms of a direct comparison to something like Fortnite, I think Fortnite is so much more polished. There are things about Fortnite I don't like, but we will go into that another time. Overall, I think if you haven't played PUBG, which probably is looking like it's fewer and fewer people by the day, if you haven't played PUBG and you like multiplayer experiences, you like the idea of a battle royale mode, a battle royale focused game in fact, then ultimately you're probably going to get a kick out of PUBG, at least for a limited time. If you have played PUBG, you know what it's all about, and you're either going to love it or you hate it, and that is very much the case with me. I feel that I want to love a battle royale game, but it's not going to be PUBG because I can't get over the hurdles that the developers have put in place and left in place in terms of the technical quality and overall feel, authenticity and control wise of the game, and I feel that is too much of a hurdle for me to bear, especially at this time. And so until that improves, until they improve the technical performance of that product, I cannot invest any more time in it. But that does not mean I do not recommend people go and try it out, because it is a hell of a fun time, especially if you have a group of friends who also play the game. And that is my review of PUBG. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, make sure to share it around, make a comment as you wish. Make sure you keep an eye out for my editorial video. It's not really an editorial, but it's more of a rant and a ramble and an industry talk about some of Brendan Green's comments. That should be dropping over the Christmas period, and I will see you next time.